Welcome to the Treasury Update podcast, presented by Strategic Treasurer, your source for interesting Treasury news, analysis, and insights in your car, at the gym, or wherever you decide to tune in. Strategic Treasurer ran a flash survey on the impact of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Approximately 100 respondents answered 7 questions about this conflict, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on the data. Let's begin with the impact. What has already happened and what is expected to happen?
Yeah, thanks, Nikki. And thanks to everybody who responded to the survey. So the impact of the Ukraine conflict on Treasury. The first question was, are you already experiencing a direct impact on your business operations? And this came back, 44% had indicated yes, there was a direct impact on their business operations or supply chain so far. So this is fairly fast results of having an impact, far more than we had expected. So we would postulate that this is more related to the sanctions and how that's had an impact across the board on what people buy and what they spend. So 4 out of 9 had already identified that. But Nikki, I think the other part of your question goes to what's expected. So the next question was, do you think the conflict will have a direct impact on your business operations or supply chains? So this is a forward look, and that jumps up to 74%. So just under 3/4 expected to have an impact. Now, significant or moderate total 26%. Minor impact is just under 50%. No was 17%. 8% were unsure at this early stage in this invasion. I guess what we're saying is that the impact looks to be broad in terms of impacting the majority of companies in some way. Yet the total significance, people that think it's moderate or significant, it falls down to about 1/4 of the companies. We might guess that some of that's due to the size and nature of Russia's economy, what they feed into the overall supply chain, things that relate to food production, whether it's wheat directly, urea, other things that go into making fertilizers that then translate into food production, or oil, and some of the metals. So we think that that's where those numbers are coming from. Russia is, by some measures, the 11th largest economy in the world. So it's not minuscule, but it's fairly small. And so the impact looks to be moderate to significant on about 1/4 of the firms.
Thank you for that. So for research and preparation, it seems that the majority of firms are preparing, responding, or reacting. What does this look like?
We're asking people throughout finance, most clearly Treasury and treasurers are responding. The idea and the concept of preparing for the future, looking ahead is key and core to Treasury more than any other area of finance, we would say. And so the question about, has management, Treasury, or corporate asked for additional information on the potential impact of the conflict? And remember, these are early days, but a slight majority, 51%, indicated that there had been additional information asked for. Do we have exposure to Russian banks, rubles, anything probably related to oil, what the expectations there might be around energy. This shows that people are responding fairly quickly to look at, gather some additional information on what the exposure might be. But we ask another question on this short survey about, have you done any research or run any models as to the potential impact of this conflict on your organization? So we saw this as a way to ask in more detail. And I would invite people to look at the infographic. You can download more information. You can see that in the show notes at strategictreasurer.com. Monitoring or morphing and gathering of information, data, or news, that was just under 60%. The next one I think is really quite interesting is 55% identified risk or exposure. So they looked at, where are we exposed? And then from that, there's additional discussion. So 53% held meetings or had calls on this topic. What I thought was fairly interesting from this is 16%, or about 1 in 7, have run models or engaged in creating scenarios to account for different situations. Could be foreign currency volatility. What would that look like? It could be price changes, interest rates. 1 in 6 have run models or scenarios to identify how they would respond to this. And so due to the magnitude, it was worth a look by the majority of companies. And then I think as they've evaluated what their potential impact is, a subset of those, a much smaller subset, identified that there's enough of a risk to take the next step. This was very good foresight and planning and early preparation to respond to potential impacts here.
Now, looking at the responses regarding economic and business concerns, it seems that supply chain is the largest. Can you identify any key or notable points here?
Yeah, so 54% identified trade or supply chain impacts as their biggest concerns. That was ranked number one, 54%. We dropped down to 46%, just below half, indicating cost of energy. And this flows from Russia being a significant provider of energy, more so directly to the Europeans, but certainly that had a big impact. And then there's the flows of the impact as we move down to overall rate of inflation or cost of goods. This impact on supply chain, the impact on some of the materials and sanctions. It goes down to interest rates at 43%, other commodities at 40%, and just under 40%, 39%, indicated FX price volatility was a significant economic or business concern. So quite a few concerns here, Nikki, across the board, between the 40 and 55% of respondents identifying each of these.
And the final two questions from the Flash survey touch on cyber attacks or threats and the possible expansion of the conflict outside its current theater. What do you think we need to know?
Couple of things, one from our survey and one from what's happening with some of the government entities. So the question was, has your company encountered more cyber threats since Russia invaded Ukraine? 17% said yes. So this is just over 1 out of 6 have said that this has increased. That's in a fairly short time. I mean, this was in just over a week from the start of the invasion of Russia attacking Ukraine. That's pretty significant data. It's more than I was suspecting, but there's a bigger warning here. Other than that 17% have already indicated it, CISA from the U.S. government, there's a group that now requires reporting from particular industries, those that are critical infrastructure industries like energy, financial services. There's 16 or 19 of these infrastructure industries that have to report more quickly on certain situations like, for example, ransomware. You have to report within 72 hours if you've been subjected to a ransomware attack. And if you've paid a ransom, you have to report that within 24 hours if you're in one of these industries. So these warnings are becoming quite strong, quite severe. There's a faster reporting mechanism in the U.S., not a reporting mechanism, but a reporting requirement. The government's concerned about this, and we're seeing an uptick here in cyber threats since this invasion. So I think that bears really close watching from a company-wide perspective. But I think this, Treasury needs to be mindful of this as well, because that can impact your ability to move cash or business operations. That creates some cause for concern. And to your second question, Nikki, about the size and scope, we asked the question, do you think the conflict will expand beyond the direct Ukraine theater during 2022? In other words, will fighting go outside the borders of the Ukraine? Now, this is not truly a Treasury question or a finance question, but it's a broader question. And there's obviously concerns about, will Article 5 of NATO be invoked if there's any kind of attack on a NATO country? What could happen here? 45% said yes, they believe that the conflict will expand beyond Ukraine during 2022. As we were yes and no, 45 and 55%. That's worth noting. That's a fairly significant negative expectation that this could expand into a bigger situation. So, however we factor these items in, 45% of your peers think that this could expand, which is a significant concern among many of what that would mean. But it feels fairly significant that 45% believe it could expand outside Ukraine during 2022. So it's we're now into the third week of this attack. It's brutal, it's difficult, and it's having an impact on finances and treasuries as well. But if we set aside the human and humanitarian side of things, there's a flow into the financial side, and that's really the focus of this survey. The other parts are a significant concern as well, but this survey and research is focused on the Treasury, finance, supply chain impact of this conflict.
Thank you for your insights, and that is all the questions we have for today.
Yeah, thanks, Nikki, and everybody who took the survey. Thank you. And in the show notes or down below, you should be able to see where you could download the infographic from this. Thank you.
You've reached the end of another episode of the Treasury Update podcast. Be sure to follow Strategic Treasurer on LinkedIn. Just search for Strategic Treasurer. This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.